Vera! Vera, I need you to leave the house right now.
Are you a fan of the original Conjuring movie, but wish so badly it was a low-budget B-movie? And maybe a little bit of sprinkling of the one of the kind of Amateurville sequels that kind of came out directed kind of video in the kind of the 90s. If that is your dream, then ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Dark Entities, a low-budget haunted house movie that's a surprisingly similar plot to the original Conjuring movie. But what is that plot? Let me tell you all about it. Well, it focuses on a family that move into a old house that seems to be haunted by a variety of spirits, but one in particular is particularly malevolent and seems to take an interest in one of the family members, seeming to want to possess them and kind of take control of them. So the family have no choice but to turn to a couple of spiritualists, one of whom is kind of psychic, the other is more knowledgeable about kind of the occult and things like that. And what will happen? Well, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss Dark Entities. Well, as I've said, and you can probably tell by that synopsis there, yes, the plot is very similar to the original Conjuring movie, which was of course based on a true event, and this one doesn't purport to be that, and it's not really, you know, overtly saying it's a Conjuring kind of low-budget remake, but it's clearly influenced by that movie. So if you like kind of haunted house movies, you like a kind of a spooky low-budget adventure, then you may want to check it out, because it definitely, you know, copies those kind of same kind of beats. And there are a couple of attempts here, I think, to have some spooky atmosphere, and it's clearly low budget, but I think that it kind of does its best on the budget that it can to have some kind of creepier moments, some of the kind of the photography within this kind of property in the dark. I think, you know, they do a reasonable job here with clearly limited resources to try and give it a little bit of a kind of a spooky vibe. I actually, despite this movie really obviously having a very low budget and the kind of ghostly air quote effects are rather limited, I actually do think they were kind of charming. And one of the kind of the things that this you know, you'll see in kind of Halloween is people dressed up as ghosts with sheets over their heads, and that is literally what some of the ghosts look like in here. But there is a kind of reason for it, which I kind of I thought was okay. But I actually did think it looked fairly effective, and kind of considering they kind of build that into the kind of the story, it kind of works in the kind of the movie's favour here, which I thought was kind of okay. The movie is also fairly, you know, it's quite heavily peppered throughout in regards to this kind of supernatural kind of involvement, and so you're not waiting for the end, so you're kind of like, you get plenty of it throughout the movie. There's a reasonable attempt at mythology here, kind of world building, looking at kind of how this house and its ghostly inhabitants, how they interact with our kind of group of protagonists, this trio of siblings, and what kind of relationships they might have with this kind of this family and their kind of backstory. So I actually kind of I quite like some of the kind of the world building within the movie. A female lead, I think, does a kind of a reasonable job here with kind of the acting. And I'll be honest with you, that's kind of where my positives end. So let's talk about what doesn't work. Pretty much everything else. So let's talk about some broader stuff first of all. I think this movie's too long. It runs just under 2 hours. It didn't need to be this long. This is clearly someone who has filmed you know, a bunch of kind of scenes and hasn't wanted to cut stuff out. It's too long. It's not really kind of, it's not visually kind of interesting enough to really warrant a particularly kind of long movie, and the story really isn't that kind of complicated, to be honest with you. I think they could have cut 20 minutes to half an hour out of this. You know, just gone for your kind of standard kind of 80 to 90 minute movie, and it could be a lot more kind of punchy and effective. It didn't need to be this. It does kind of outstay its welcome a little bit. I've mentioned already, this film is low budget, but it's really low budget. You know, it kind of feels almost like a stage play production at some point. It's just been kind of filmed. It has that kind of amateurish kind of feel to it, where you really do feel like that these are the bare minimum in regards to technical kind of like things that you'll see on screen in regards to supernatural effects. Obviously, you'll just kind of see doors opening, and you'll see only part of the door, or there's someone just kind of behind it, kind of opening and stuff like that. You know, there's not a huge amount that we sort of see on the screen that's quite kind of low tech in what we do see. I've already mentioned, like, I kind of still like some of the aesthetics with these ghosts, but there's nothing too ethereal about them, if you're being completely honest. It kind of does feel a little bit like, you know, it's going to be too cheap and kind of like low tech for some, unfortunately. I think maybe the biggest problem that this movie faces is its acting. The female lead, I think, is okay, but some of the other cast, including the kind of the older brother, unfortunately, are on the weaker side here. And you know, the acting generally is worse than it is better, if that makes sense. So the majority of the cast here, I think, struggle. There's a few cast members that maybe do a little better, but the most part, it's a pretty kind of weaker in regard to the acting. And the movie is clearly just so influenced by the Conjuring movie. It kind of changes a few things around, and you know, we have slightly different kind of family dynamic with 3 siblings rather than 2 adults and kind of like a bunch of kids. And you know, the kind of the couple of paranormal investigators are also brother and sister rather than a kind of romantic couple. But again, it's just sort of like aesthetic changes that kind of the bulk of the story does seem a bit too similar to the Conjuring movie, unfortunately, which kind of makes it feel like it is just kind of a little bit of a rip-off. And you have to be honest about when you're watching something like this. Why would you watch a low-budget, kind of very kind of amateurish movie when you could just watch The Conjuring, which was obviously a big hit and a kind of a high-budget, high-production value? What value is there in watching a kind of a lot lower-budget version of it? I mean, this movie, I think, would have benefited from having a slightly kind of, you know, more differences in regards to the kind of the stories and the story beats here, rather than just kind of like small things that they could have tweaked and stuff. Like I said, there's an attempt to have the mythology in regards to the kind of these ghosts being kind of maybe related to our protagonists, but it's not enough. I think the story beats are just too similar to The Conjuring. You know, what happens in regards to order and things like this, the kind of the assistance with the filming and kind of all that kind of stuff. It feels very much like it's almost trying to be somewhat of a kind of a remake of The Conjuring, but just a kind of a low budget layer of paint over it to kind of try and hide the fact. So, you know, it's unfortunately, it's not a particularly kind of enthralling movie. It's too slow because of the long running time. What you do see, there are some elements which I kind of like, but for the most part, it's a little bit too kind of low budget for some. The acting performances are kind of not exactly gripping. The writing and the dialogue isn't particularly strong, and the kind of the performances of that dialogue does not make you want to buy into the characters. It's very hard to kind of like buy into this kind of like these protagonists as real kind of people, because you know you just kind of like can't really get around it. It's not particularly scary at any point. It could have maybe tried to be a little bit darker, a little bit more menacing, but again, I suspect a lot of this is down to budget. It's not a particularly interesting movie. I think there were some things here that they did the best they could with, but unfortunately, maybe lack of experience, lack of budget, concluded ultimately to make this movie a little bit of a miss. I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.